Let's get prepared for exam number 2. This exam prep will cover a comprehensive review of the material we have discussed, so it is crucial to be well prepared. First, let's review the instructions for the exam again. This is the same as what you have seen in exam number 1. The exam will be administered via Canvas under the quizzes section. It is mandatory for students to use Responder's lockdown browser and ensure that a front-facing camera is enabled during the exam. Please be aware that the Chromebook operating system is not recommended for running the web browser. There is no need to bring a calculator, as the lockdown browser is configured to include a scientific calculator. The exam permits the use of open notes and a physical textbook. However, the use of ebook is not allowed. The exam consists of 50 questions with a possible scores of 100 points. You will have 2 hours to complete the exam, and you will have 2 attempts to select the one correct answer for each question. The exam will be accessible starting Friday, August 9th at 12 p.m. PST and must be completed by Saturday, August 10th at 12 p.m. PST. Exam number 2 covers only the last 4 chapters from exam number 1, such as chapter 10, 11, 12, and 15. Below, I have highlighted selected bullet points and topics to guide your study and indicate areas of focus. I will also provide explanations for the practice questions to assist you in your preparation. In Chapter 10, we started off with defining the GDP. It is the market value of all final goods and services produced within a country in a given period of time. Make sure that you look at the transaction for newly produced goods all the way to the final stage, meaning that the transaction is sent or ended at the end user or consumer. And GDP must be the total incomes equal to the total expenditures in the overall economy. In comparison to GDP, GNP takes transactions within the country and overseas. GNP includes income that American citizens earn abroad, but excludes income that foreigners earn in the US. The components of GDP in the GDP equation, y equal to c plus I plus g plus nx, where y is the GDP or output level, c is the total consumption spending, I is the total investment spending, G is the total government spending or purchases, and NX is net exports. GDP can take value as nominal and real. Nominal GDP is valued at the current price level, whereas real GDP is valued using the price level at the base year. To define GDP per capita, you take GDP divided by the number of population. And for the GDP deflator, you take nominal GDP divided by real GDP and multiply by 100. A recession is defined as a decline in real GDP for 2 consecutive quarters. A country is considered a rich economy if it usually has a higher GDP per capita than that of poorer economy, although GDP is not a perfect measure of well-being due to some factors such as exclusion of leisure, non-market activities, quality of environment, and distribution of income. It is the best economic indicator that pinpoints how a nation runs its own social well-being. In Chapter 11, we discuss what the cost of living is, starting with the 4 price index indicators, CPI, PPI, PCE, and GDP deflator. A quick note about CPI is that it measures the cost of a basket of goods and services bought by a typical consumer relative to the cost of the same basket in the base year. On the other hand, the GDP deflator reflects prices of all goods and services produced domestically, meaning that it does not include prices from the importing sector. Additionally, you should examine the problems in measuring the cost of living as listed, such as substitution bias, introduction of new goods, and unmeasured of quality change. Most importantly, you should know how to calculate the cost of living, starting with the CPI, which is the ratio of the price of the basket in the current year to that of the base year. Then, understand how to calculate the inflation rate, which is the percentage change in the CPI from the preceding period. Furthermore, know how to calculate the value of dollar from different times and the difference between real interest rates and nominal interest rates. In Chapter 12, we delved into the topic of production and growth within an economy. We began with an essential concept, productivity. Productivity is the cornerstone of economic growth and is described by the production function, Y equals to A function L K H N. Here Y represents the output level, L denotes the amount of labor, K stands for physical capital, H signifies human capital, N encompasses natural resources, and A represents technological knowledge. It is crucial to understand the four determinants of productivity. These are given by the physical capital per worker, K over L, human capital per worker, H over L, natural resources per worker, N over L, and the technological knowledge, A. We also explore the concepts of saving and investment in capital stock. A key point here is that saving must equal investment. When an economy aims to accumulate more capital stock through investment or saving, there is a trade-off involved. Current consumption must decrease to allow for future growth. In the short run, a higher savings rate can boost the capital stock, enhance productivity, and spur GDP growth. However, in the long run, although higher savings rates can lead to increases in productivity and income, the growth rate of these increases is not as pronounced. This phenomenon highlights the catch-up effect, where poorer countries have the potential to catch up with the richer countries. Due to these dynamics, it is essential to consider the economies of scale. Specifically, we need to determine whether the production function exhibits constant returns to scale or diminishing returns to scale. Constant returns to scale occur when scaling up all inputs by a certain factor results in an equivalent increase in output. Conversely, diminishing returns to scale happen when the production increases by a smaller proportion as the quantity of inputs increases. Additionally, we discussed that investment can originate not only from domestic sources but from foreign sources through foreign direct investment, FDI, and foreign portfolio investment, FPI. Regardless of whether investment comes from domestic or foreign sources, the benefits remain substantial. Increased investment leads to a higher capital stock, enhanced productivity, and improved wages within the economy. Chapter 15 discusses the nature of unemployment and its measures. We started off by defining the population that can be counted as in the labor force, including those who are employed and those who are unemployed. In addition, we defined who are not in the labor force. Please make sure you understand who can be counted in each of these categories. Next, you need to know the formulas to calculate the labor force, the unemployment rate, and the labor force participation rate. Then we have the measures of labor underutilization, such as U1, U2, U3, U4, U5, and U6. We did an exercise in a lecture calculating these measures, so please review that. Another important note is that the nature of frictional unemployment, which is the voluntary transition within the economy, and structural unemployment, which is the mismatch between what companies need and what available workers can offer. You should look up some examples that apply to these types of unemployment. Then there is the natural rate of unemployment or full employment, which is not zero unemployment. When the economy is at a steady state, frictional unemployment and structural unemployment can still exist. We also have cyclical unemployment, which is caused by cyclical shifts in investment sentiments due to changes in business cycles. Next, job search and government-run employment benefits, such as unemployment insurance. This is eligible for those who were laid off because the employer no longer needed their skills, but it is not eligible for those who quit jobs, were fired for cause, or just entered the job market. Then we have the impact of minimum wage laws. These laws can cause structural unemployment, which affects those with low levels of skills and experience the most. And lastly, union. You should look up the benefits and costs associated with unions. Unions can bargain for better wages, benefits, and working conditions for workers. However, they can also raise wages above the equilibrium level, which benefits some workers, but can do so at the expense of others. Now, here are the sample practice questions. Question number 1. Regarding the contribution to GDP, we only consider the final market value, which is the value at which a scooter is produced, $290. We do not consider the price of steel used in production. Therefore, the answer is B. $290 contributes to GDP. Question number 2. Although Michael is a U.S. citizen, the transaction involving the purchase of a newly manufactured motorcycle made in Jamaica should be counted in Jamaica's GDP only. This is because GDP measures the value of goods and services produced within a country's borders. Therefore, this transaction does not contribute to U.S. GDP. So the answer is B, Jamaica's GDP, but it is not in U.S. GDP. Question number 3. To answer this question, you should label each transaction as a component of GDP, noting that depreciation and transfer payments are not part of GDP. Once you do that, you can add up all of the components to define GDP. In the exam, I may give the same data but ask you to define each of the components of GDP, such as C, I, G, and NX. Here the answer is D. GDP is $7,603. Question number 4. To tackle this question, start by calculating the GDP deflator for each respective year. Remember, the GDP deflator is computed as the ratio of nominal GDP to real GDP. Once you have these values, you can then calculate the inflation rate. The inflation rate is the percentage change in GDP deflator from the previous year. Based on these calculations, the answer is B. The GDP deflator and the inflation rate for 2022 is 9.16 and negative 10.3 respectively. Question number 5. To answer this question, start by calculating the basket price for each respective month. The basket price is the sum of market values of gas and milk. Once you have the basket prices, you can compute the CPI by dividing the basket price of the current month by the basket price of the base month. After determining the CPI, you can then calculate the inflation rate. Remember, the inflation rate is the percentage change of the CPI from the previous month. Based on these calculations, the answer is A. The inflation rate for November is 4.39%. Question number 6. To answer this question, start by calculating Jasmine's nominal salary percentage change. You do this by taking her salary in the ending year, subtracting her salary in the beginning year, dividing by the salary in the beginning year, and then multiplying by 100% to get the percentage change. Next, calculate the inflation rate, which is the percentage change of the CPI. Finally, to determine the percentage change in Jasmine's real salary, subtract the inflation rate from the percentage change in her nominal salary. Based on these calculations, the answer is A, 4%. Question number 7. You can begin by defining the inflation rate, which is the percentage change of the CPI from the previous year. After determining the inflation rate, you can calculate the real interest rate by subtracting the inflation rate from the nominal interest rate. Based on these calculations, the answer is B, 2%. Question number 8. To find the productivity of these individuals, you need to start with their production output and the hours they worked. For Sasha, her productivity is calculated by taking her production of 7 units and dividing it by the 6 hours she works, which equals to 1.17. For Clara, her productivity is calculated by taking her production of 9 units and dividing it by the 10 hours she works, which equals to 0.9. Therefore, you can see that Sasha's productivity is higher than Clara's, so the answer is A. Question number 9. You should start off by listing the data provided in the question, such as the population, working population, and production level or real GDP for both country Y and country Z. Then to find the productivity, you divide the production level by the working population. To find the real GDP per capita, you divide the production level by the total population. Finally, you can compare the results and see that both the productivity and real GDP per capita country Y are lower than those of country Z. Therefore, the answer is D. Question number 10. To find the labor force participation rate, you start by dividing the labor force by the adult population and then multiplying by 100%. Remember, the labor force is the sum of the number of employed and the number of unemployed individuals. To find the unemployment rate, simply divide the number of unemployed by the labor force and then multiply by 100%. Following these steps, you will arrive at the results which give you answer B. Labor force participation rate is 89.5% and unemployment rate is 19.3%. Question number 11. From the table, you can see there are a total of 12 individuals. If you carefully read the status of these individuals, you will find that Alan and Calvin should not be considered part of labor force. Alan has not looked for a job in several years, and Calvin is retired and last applied for work 10 weeks ago, which is more than the 4-week threshold for being considered part of the labor force. Therefore, the number of the individuals in the labor force is 10, and the answer is B. Question number 12. Let's consider Meredith's case first. She is looking for a job that best fits her skills as a computer programmer. This scenario represents frictional unemployment, where an individual is temporarily unemployed while searching for a job that matches their skills and preferences. Now, let's look at Jenna's case. Jenna faces a mismatch between the available jobs in the market and her skills. This situation is an example of structural unemployment, where there is a fundamental disconnect between the skills workers possess and the skills demanded by employers. Therefore, Meredith's case is an example of frictional unemployment, and Jenna's case is an example of structural unemployment. So the answer is C.